All right, let's get right into it. At the very center of a massive, escalating conflict, there's this one tiny stretch of water. But, it might just be the most important and the most vulnerable waterway on the entire planet. Today, we're going to break down exactly why the Strait of Hormuz is this ticking time bomb that could just shatter the global economy.
And really, to get a sense of just how high the stakes are, you've got to hear this. It's a pretty chilling prediction from an energy analyst named Commodities. Look, we're not talking about some small hiccup here. We're talking about a potential crisis that can make the energy shocks of the 1970s look like a walk in the park. So yeah, how on earth do we get to this point?
Well, it all comes down to some recent events that have suddenly thrown this critical waterway right back into the spotlight and put it on a real knife's edge.
So what's the immediate trigger? Recent U.S. military strikes on Iran. That one action has just dramatically ratcheted up the tension. It's taken the whole situation from a low simmer to a full-on boil, and it's brought the world right to the brink of what a lot of analysts are calling a totally unprecedented conflict.
And that leads us straight to this warning from Vandana Hari over at Vanda Insights. The key thing to grasp here, it's all about how long this lasts. A quick skirmish, that's one thing, but a conflict that drags on for days, that's when we start talking about what she calls the absolute worst-case scenarios for the world's energy supply. Scary stuff.
Okay, so you might be wondering, why? Why does a fight in this one little corner of the world have such massive global consequences? Well, it all boils down to one single critical piece of geography.
And here it is, the Strait of Hormuz. The best way to picture it? Think of a giant funnel. It is literally the only way for ships to get from the Persian Gulf out into the open ocean. That makes it, absolutely essential for some of the world's biggest oil producers. And when I say essential, just wait till you see the numbers. They're staggering. 13 million. Let that sink in. That is the number of barrels of oil that have to squeeze through this tiny strait every single day. It's the lifeblood of the global economy, and it's all funneling through this one incredibly vulnerable spot. And this really puts that dependency into perspective, doesn't it? 31%. Think about that. Almost a third of all the oil that's moved by ship on this entire planet has to go through this one little passage. I'm not exaggerating when I say this is the world's most important oil artery, period.
So who's counting on this artery? Well, it's basically a who's who of energy giants. We're talking about Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, even Iran itself. They all depend on this one passage to get their oil out to the rest of the world. So you see, any problem here, it's not just one country's issue, it's everyone's problem.
Okay, so with the stakes being this ridiculously high, you can bet that analysts are trying to figure out how this whole thing could play out. They're mapping out the scenarios, from just a serious problem to a complete and utter catastrophe. And this is what they call the escalation ladder. It kind of shows the potential path from bad to much, much worse. So step one, it could start with Iran's own oil exports getting cut off. Boom, that's 2 million barrels a day gone from the market. Then you could see things escalate to retaliatory attacks on oil facilities all across the Gulf. But the real nightmare scenario, that's step three, a total and complete shutdown of the strait. So you have to ask, what could possibly push Iran to do something so extreme? Well, according to that same analyst, Saul Kavanik, it really just comes down to one thing: survival. If the regime feels like it's facing an existential threat, like its very existence is on the line, then suddenly, blocking the strait goes from being totally unthinkable to pretty much unavoidable. It becomes their last-ditch option. All right, so how likely is this worst-case scenario? Well, another analyst, Andy Lippo, puts the odds at 33%, a 1 in 3 chance. Now, I don't know about you, but that is a deeply uncomfortable number for anyone who pays attention to the global economy. Which brings us to the big question, right? The $100 question. Why does any of this matter to you, no matter where you are in the world? What does a closed-off strait actually mean for the global economy, and more importantly, for your wallet? To really get a grip on the potential fallout, we've got to take a trip back in time to the 1970s. The oil shocks back then, they caused some serious economic pain. But here's the kicker. Analysts are worried a Hormuz shutdown could be way, way worse. We're talking potentially 3 times as bad. And what's the big difference? Back then, it was an embargo. Now we're talking about a full-on physical blockade. No ships in, no ships out. So what does that actually look like in real terms? It comes down to one simple, very powerful number: $100. $100 a barrel. A long disruption would almost certainly send oil prices soaring into the triple digits. And that
That sends a massive shockwave of inflation across the entire planet. It means you'd be paying more for everything. The gas for your car, the food you buy at the store, everything.
And just to put that into perspective for you, take a look at where prices were right before this whole thing kicked off. Brent crude, which is a big international benchmark, was hovering around $72 a barrel. So jumping from 72 to over 100, yeah, that's not a small bump. That is a massive leap, and it's one that would be felt absolutely everywhere, from the gas pump to the grocery aisle.
So what's the big takeaway here? What does this all mean? It means we're living in a world that's just incredibly, precariously balanced on a razor's edge.
The bottom line is really this. Our huge, complex, interconnected global economy, it has a shockingly simple single point of failure. Our complete and total reliance on this one little waterway creates this massive vulnerability. It means a regional fight can explode into a global crisis, literally in the blink of an eye.
And that leaves us with one final, and honestly pretty unsettling question to think about. We've built our entire modern world on the assumption that energy will just keep flowing through this one, single, fragile artery. So the question isn't really if it can be threatened anymore. The real question is, what happens to all of us when it finally is?